We had the Crystal Palace, the World's Fair, various things showcasing the might and power of industrialism and ideas or technology. We also saw that people were beginning to gain more work in more specialized areas. And eventually we'll see this spill out into, say, the assembly line, which Henry Ford introduced to the world. Next slide. Now, industrial society. Now, in society, we saw that industry actually bred more work for people. People had paid wages. They began to have more specialized skills, as I said before. But the problem with industry, as people moved into more urban centers, they were being crowded and put into, well, generally dank, dark, smelly, and disgusting areas, which often bred contempt for their upper class leaders or bosses often. So you would see things like in America, the Haymarket Square rebellion, riot, or say in Europe, the Peterloo riot, rebellion, excuse me. Next slide. And as you can see, here are some children actually working in a factory. I'm not sure which specific factory this is, but the work was very dangerous. It had a lot of tedium to it. Eventually some people would have been working on, say, less than maybe 4 hours of sleep, and they lose often their concentration. Sometimes they could lose arms, hands, anything. There was barely any regulation, especially for, say, a young child of, say, 6 to 8, who were often beginning their employment. It was dangerous for them. Next slide. Now we also saw the rise of more equality in the workplace because women were beginning to go out to the work field and have these specialized jobs also. Although it was mainly working class women, not per se middle class women. Uh, the constant belief for middle class women, as we know, was that they were to be in the home, centered around the family, and leading familial life. Another thing that we saw from the age of industrialism, there were more specialized goods that could go out to more people. This fine china plate, this was manufactured wholesale. I mean, this was the spectacular thing about it. Rich or poor, you could often still get some of the products that your bosses could own, slightly. And then we have electricity, which is another big thing. With electricity, we could actually power entire cities and houses. Yes, with coal power, but at the same time, we wouldn't have to use, say, kerosene lamps, which were often very dangerous and explosive at the time. And then people could actually work longer hours. Next slide. Now, industry and its effects on philosophy and politics. Here we have Karl Marx, Engels, and Tolstoy. All of these men were great writers and socialists who spoke about the classism that often appeared with modern industry. Here we have a cartoon describing the workers who carry up their middle class and upper class leaders right from under them, and we see them bursting through as if they were about to rebel. Next slide. Here are some of their works. We know the Communist Manifesto goes to Marx and Engels. For Tolstoy, he's noted for works like Anna Karenina, which was basically describing various steps of class. And then we also have a portrait of the Haymarket Square riot. Now, although it seems like it's kind of out of place in Europe, it's actually very key because some of our main modern concepts of internationalism with global business actually reflect what happened within the 19th century and later in the 20th century. This was the starting point. So every revolt within, say, America or India at that time, that was whatever workers or sepoy rebellion, that was key to trade and also the exchange of ideas. For instance, we have anarchism and socialism leaking out into America as a result of the works of, say, men like Engels and Marx, and then also the first anarchist leader, I'm not sure, I remember he was an Italian, but next slide. Another thing that we saw, industry and the environment. Now, since there were no environmental gaps or caps on, say, coal release, the release of, say, uh, sorry, on carbon release in the 19th century, we saw that many places had thick, smoggy air, and people couldn't actually breathe. There were children with birth defects, children getting out and having rickets, which is actually a disease of the shins and also the knees that cause them to kind of be, well, bow-shaped, really. And it's also, which was derived from the blotting out of the sun from coal plants, coal factories. Another thing that we saw was the rise of cholera, especially in Britain. Now, this was due also in part to, say, modern sanitation problems. People were leaving their dung or whatever refuse that they had out in the streets, and that was leaking into their water system. But also, we had businesses improperly dumping waste into, say, the Thames, and that was killing people. It didn't actually stop until John Snow, the famous epidemiologist, actually called out most of the corporations and the government. We also saw that this actually led out to have government regulation, especially for the environment and disease. I also included Typhoid Mary of New York, which also introduces how disease spread amongst the lower classes and eventually up into the middle classes and the upper class in general. Next slide. So here we have actual descriptions of how the lower classes lived. As I said before, it was very cramped and dank and very dirty. There was barely any space, especially you see in the street. You see that they have market vendings, and they also have very close buildings, and the roads aren't as spacious as they should be. And then over here we have a lower class family, possibly working class, who is actually probably living within their own space that would be considered their living room, their bedroom, their dining room. So essentially, they were living in something very dank and dirty, as you can see from the floors, although it's black and white. But the child's hands, the girl's hands are very remarkable because they're very black, as if they've been working. Next slide. Now, in the area of industry with technology, we saw the rise of practices of new chemical methods.
All right. I think